Okay, that's all right. Good. Um, I'm not good in following rules, but I'll try to stick in here. Uh, my name is Boaz Wachtel. Thank you for the nice introduction and inviting me to speak here today. I was asked by the organizers to give a brief overview of the history of medical cannabis in Israel. What you see here is a insignia of the Israeli Medical Cannabis Agency. That is on the Green Book that is about to be published in English. And next. This is the first 50 plants that were authorized by the Ministry of Health in 2007 to grow. It was grown on a rooftop in Galilee by the first grower that received the commercial license. His mother is a biology teacher. So that's the beginning, actually, of the growing. Before that, I mean, there was a supply issue that we dealt with for 10 years. The Ministry of Health said, well, we get it from the police. The police said no. And then they said, well, let the patients grow. I said, the growers are not, gardeners. I mean, they are sick people. They cannot attend. So it took a long time until we reached that stage, and we will get to it a little later as well. Life is everything but what you plan for. I was in Washington, D.C., working for the Israeli embassy, and I came across by chance by a bunch of folks who told me we have a solution for drug addiction. It's an African shrub called ibogaine. And I left everything. I was working in Madison Avenue selling Israeli products in the U.S. and joined this group of activists who were basically with no money, and they needed help. I also didn't have much money, but I said I'm going to help. And then we started working with drug addicts. We traveled to Holland, and many of them were HIV, and that was the first time that I noticed two things. First, that the cannabis helped those HIV folks really with nausea and appetite and general mood. That was early on in 1988. And secondly, that I noticed that in the Netherlands they had a normal drug policy as opposed to the United States or Israel. And then I came back to Israel, registered a drug foundation, drug laws reform foundation, 1994, and then participated. We made a lot of noise, demonstrations, so forth. And then the parliament decided to start a committee to study the legal status of cannabis. It was headed by Mishulam. I was a public representative, one of two people. And that committee had two recommendations, one good one and one bad one. The first one was not to change the legal status of cannabis for recreational use. The second was, because of Mishulam, was to allow very sick patients access to cannabis. So usually in Israel, when they set up a committee, they want to bury the outcome in the drawers and so on. I took that recommendation. I went to Bar Ilan University, took a certified clinical research manager course, because you got to speak the language of the authorities, otherwise they don't know what you're talking about. So I prepared the drug master file, which is, quote unquote, because it wasn't a real drug master file that you submit to the FDA. It was there was no internet, hardly any internet then. We went to the library, collected the data, and went to the Ministry of Health, said this is the committee's recommendations. These are an HIV patient that I came with. He says he wants access to medical cannabis. And then in 1999, because there are 30,000 foundations registered in Israel, and I wanted to promote legalization and medicalization of cannabis, I started a political party in Israel called the Green Leaf Party. It's very easy to start a political party in Israel. You need like $20,000 and 100 signatures, and you can register. There are 50 parties in Israel. So it's and about 30 of them are running for the elections every time. We shocked the nation that a cannabis medicalization had at least 1.5% of the vote, of the electoral vote. And as a result, later on, we saw other parties adopting, you cannot ignore 1.5% of the vote, adopting such more progressive agenda. So that is a brief history of the Israeli medical cannabis program. What you are now here in 2017 in CannaTech, what you're seeing is basically a 20 plus year work. This is Professor Meshulam in 1995. And then that's the sequence of what went through. I was thrown out of the parliament in the last, when they submitted the recommendations because of their rejection of the need to reschedule cannabis from an illegal drug to decriminalize it or legalize it. And I got into a fight with a military general who kicked me out. So as you see, in 2004, we had like 60 applicants. In 2007, the first license was awarded to Tikkun Olam, which I brought the first 3 growers into the Ministry of Health because the Ministry of Health said, oh, we don't know any growers. We need healthy people who are willing to grow. And because I had a political party and I knew a few growers, you know, so I introduced them to the ministry. At 2007, they started a distribution center in the psychiatric hospital, not an ideal place to distribute medical cannabis. Actually, it was in a detox center for drugs, but we got a small room. We used to roll the joints, like 600-700 joints a day, and the patients started pouring in, and we moved on. And then slowly it evolved, and then Yuval Landschaft became the head of the National Medical Cannabis Program. We call him the locomotive because he gets things done, you know. And then we saw a sharp rise in number of patients. It was followed by a few governmental decisions on how to accelerate the adherence, the completion and adherence to UN Drug Convention. UN Drug Conventions allow the dispensation and the growing of medical cannabis. Anyone who tells you otherwise is lying. There's a model for it to happen. It's the same model that applies to opium, production, distribution, handling, storage, and everything. That same model applies to cannabis. It is the model how to use illegal drugs for medicinal use. And then they published in Hebrew the Green Book. I'm still waiting, everybody's still waiting for the English translation. There was a decision to allow exports. That would take a while because you need GMP level exports leveled by the growers, and some of them are still not there. The government funding medical cannabis research in a number of areas, agriculture, medicine, and so forth, which is very nice of the Israeli government. Expansion of Israeli growers abroad. We see that helping and getting into business to other countries. Opening it now to additional growers, and the whole value chain from production to dispensation is now open for commercial competition. And then the emergence of the International Medical Cannabis Conference, this conference and another CannaTech conference, which are attracting a lot of international folks interested in what's happening in Israel as a leading country in medical cannabis. And then the emergence of a auxiliary scene in Israel and so forth. So what is the medical cannabis industry? It's my view. I've been in it for the last, many years, 20-something years. It's embryonic, I think, time-wise. It's fragmented. I mean, the emergence of branding is still in its infancy. It's transformative. It changes rapidly. It's disruptive to the pharmaceutical industry. I mean, we see patients in Israel who are, especially the elderly, who are on 8 or 9 medications. When they go on cannabis, they're down to 1 or 2 medications. So what will happen is that the big industry, the big pharma, will not be able to ignore medical cannabis for a long time because they would want to get into the act, and we see it's happening already. A lot of heavy-duty investors are seeking their way in. There's volatility of prices and bubble valuations in some companies and some stock markets and so on. We have a study here in Israel that shows how much money the government can save due to the medical cannabis program. I mean, it is amazing how much money governments and health ministries can save when you introduce the medical cannabis into the general population. We see consolidation and mergers and acquisition, especially in North America. From time to time, I will show you some pictures. It's a wonderful plant, unbelievable. When I started talking about medical cannabis, people told me, it can't be doing so many things, one plant. It turns out that it does, Okay, and so there are 12 countries now with national medical cannabis programs in place. These are the countries. Netherlands was the first, Canada, Israel, Czech, newcomers, Germany, Uruguay. Some of them are more advanced than others. 29 states in the United States. Here's another wonderful flower. The green gold rush, global industry overview. So it's a fractured industry. It's very aggressive. As I see it, a lot of dumb new money pouring in, people who don't know how to get into the industry and are putting their money in very risky ventures. So you have to run very strong due diligence on who you're going to invest the money into. Often there's from the general public, there's a herd type of behavior, running after stocks that are really have no reason to go up. There was a stock in Australia that went up 3,000% in 1 week just because they were interacting with one, a seed, a very famous grower in the Netherlands. 3,000%. That's irrational. So many new businesses lack good, realistic business models. Keep it in mind. False claims, abundant. People say, we can do this, we can do that, and it will take us 1 million, and in 2 years we have a product in the market. Check it out. Pharmaceutical development is a very high-risk business. Takes a long time, costs a lot of money. You can fail. You can either have a blockbuster or a bust. So it's a high-risk business. We are in shift from illegal to legal, of course, and the regulatory environments are also, changing rapidly. So here's the lady of the month. Okay. Now, formatization of cannabis. I call it the GIF, the growth inhibiting factor of the medical cannabis industry. Are doctors' reluctance to prescribe medical cannabis? Doctors are they are not being educated about medical cannabis in medical schools. It's slowly changing, but we are just in the beginning of it. Nurses are not being taught, so they are reluctant because it's not in the paradigm of existence. And also doctors are schmoozed, as I call it, by the big pharma companies, the perks, and so on. So, and then the fact is that 50% of the patients in Israel prefer smoking over other delivery modes. So it's not comfortable for the politicians or the doctors and so on, but they can titrate better and they can feel it passes the influence of the medical cannabis goes away quickly, in 2 hours, 3 hours, as opposed to the GI tract, which lasts a long time. So many of them still prefer to smoking. And smoking has to remain an option for the patients. Even though the big pharma will come into the business and there's going to be synthesized and molecularized and whatever will happen to cannabis, the natural flower of smoking has to remain as an option. It's a viable option. And the fact that there was never a drug before approved as a smoking, as a delivery option, patch was never approved before it was approved. So smoking is really a different way of consumption, but it is legitimate and so on. So in order to overcome doctors' reluctance, clinical trials are being launched worldwide, indications for various indications, usually financed by investors and not big pharma. Why not big pharma? Because big pharma needs to build an IP strategy around whatever they do. If they don't have a patent, they cannot monopolize it. They don't fund clinical trials. That is the reason why there's a lack of data on medical cannabis around the world, because they couldn't figure out, the GW did, they couldn't figure out the IP strategy around it. Now, the fact that in the United States you cannot run research, medical cannabis research, is a big problem. By default, Israel became a leader because the Americans have the resources and the know-how and so forth to become to do medical research, but because of the federal prohibition, you cannot do good research. And then there's a catch-22. If you spend too much on clinical trials, you end up with a medication that costs too much. Look at GW. I mean, it costs 500 English pound per month for Sativax. What patients can afford 500 English pounds? These are sick people in economic crisis and so forth. And the other catch-22 is like is the Canadian catch-22, what I call it. What's the Canadian catch-22? The government says, we are opening it up for applications, and please build up your structures, and we come and investigate you. There are hundreds of applicants in Canada spending millions of dollars on structures and so forth. Out of the almost 1,000 applicants that put the applications in place and had a build-up, only 39 people, only 39 companies received the license. The rest are going bankrupt. So that is another catch-22. Just a quick rundown on what's happening. This is one company that, for proper disclosure, I'm involved with in Israel, one of the 8 growers. I helped them get a license, and they were very nice to me, so I show them what they do. This is propagation, the breeding and cloning. This is the, this is different stages, vegetation, and then another set, they do rotation, growing, of course. This is blooming, and so forth. So where are we at? Pharma, which I'm the chairman of the board of. How much time do I have? Okay, no. Just a few last words. Pharma, which is a publicly traded Australian medical cannabis company, doesn't go the medical cannabis way. Why? Because we think that until the doctor's bottleneck will be solved, there's room also to help people worldwide access cannabinoids through food supplements, what's called nutraceuticals. It's the fusion of pharmaceuticals and nutrition. So we don't need doctors' prescription. We go over the counter. We will serve the animal market and the human market as well. We work in Switzerland with big pharma folks who are coming into the space. We believe in not just single cannabinoid or synthesized cannabinoid. We go a number of cannabinoids with CBD. And what else? You know the CBD, its beneficial effects. So we extract the CBD, just 2 more sentences. We extract CBD from hemp, rather because it's much easier to grow hemp. It's rain-fed. You don't need medical to extract it from medical cannabis. This is a company we bought in Slovakia. And since I'm running out of time, I have to leave the space. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay.
That was